Welcome to Trending in Education. It's Mike Palmer again. I'm here today with Matt Cole, who is the SVP for the Americas region for a company called Promethean. We're going to hear about what it's like to be in the front of the classroom with an active panel, engaging your audience in your classroom digitally. It'll be exciting. Before we get to any of that, I want to welcome Matt to the show. Matt, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thanks for having us, Mike. I'm excited to be here, and I know it is going to be an exciting discussion without a doubt.
Awesome. The pressure is on. There you go. So, yeah, we always begin when someone's on the show for the first time to ask them how they got to this point in their professional life. This is your opportunity to tell the story of you, Matt. How did you get to this point in your professional life?
Well, I don't know. Do we have enough time? Thank you again for having us. Mike, I've been with Promethean now for about 3 years. Prior to Promethean, I was in the copy and print space with a company by the name of Xerox. Spent quite a bit of time there working with and consulting with K-12 school districts all over really the country. When the opportunity came about to join Promethean, I got to tell you, I was very excited as soon as I learned about the company and came to learn more about their mission, which really our mission is to transform the way the world learns and collaborates. And I thought, as an individual who is a son of an educator and who has children who are in school today, what better place to be joining is one where it could definitely have an impact and use my experience in the past, but my experience that I have now with, again, school age children to really help make a difference for the organization.
Yeah. And then the organization, folks may not be familiar with Promethean. Can you describe the technology and how it's used by educators, mainly in K-12, but I know it's really used in a lot of different contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. So Promethean, we're a global leader in interactive displays for education. Our products are also used in the higher education space and in the enterprise as well. Along with the products that we provide, those interactive displays, we also have a suite of software, two separate products actually. One's called Active Inspire, another called ClassFlow. And those two products allow teachers, educators to create lesson delivery plans or lesson plans that can be delivered to their students. They're interactive. They run on our interactive displays. One of those lesson delivery software tools is PC based. The other is cloud based. So there's quite a bit of a variety with the software tools, and many educators across the globe are using both. And then the other piece of what we offer at Promethean is a suite of professional services. So obviously we have technology, we have software, but people need to know how to use those two together and use them effectively. And we have a network of professional services employees who help to show people, train people, educators how to use the tools and get the most out of them throughout their days.
Yeah. And then just to clarify a little bit more, this is like a digital display at the front of the classroom that the teacher has the control of to a certain extent what he or she wants to bring up for the class to engage with. And then the idea is rather than go up to a whiteboard or go or use handouts, this is now a lot of the interactive capabilities that you would get on a tablet, an iPad is now at a much larger display size at the front of the classroom for generally K-12 kids to interact with.
That's exactly it. Think of it as the next iteration, right? The first step was probably a chalkboard, which moved to a whiteboard, which then moved to an interactive whiteboard that was most likely utilizing a projector, to now an all-in-one interactive display, a large tablet, if you will, like you had said, right at the front of the classroom, that a teacher can create lesson plans, taking content, gathering content really from anywhere, bringing that all together and then projecting that content on our display, but at the same time, allowing students to come up and interact with the content, interact within the lesson, right? A true hands-on experience. And also the teacher can obviously interact with that content as well, building lesson plans on the fly. Many used to do that with our whiteboard application, where you can open a whiteboard and a teacher can go out to the web, grab some images, maybe grab some images from a cloud account, such as their Google Drive, pull those things together, have children come up and interact with that content, with those images all throughout the day, really getting kids moving up and around in the classroom, up to the front, and getting them to interact with the lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me as a sports fan and someone who's also watched a little bit of political TV around election night. It does remind me of those kinds of contexts, the telestrator, and you do see the breakdown of the game where the commentators are able to touch the screen and get video and interactive components to play. It is a new format that is a new physical form that is entering a lot of our contexts, and it's something that folks are getting a little more familiar with. I would be curious about how, you say you've been there 3 years. That's a pretty tumultuous 3 years you've been at Promethean for, because this is also a time where the classroom space went away for a little while and then it's come back in different blends. Hybrid is something we've talked a lot about. And then also now the desire to get back into a physical classroom. I'd love to get a little bit of your perspective on what it's been like working through the pandemic years, managing this type of interactive classroom based experience.
Yeah, I think everybody would probably say that the last few years, last couple of years have been challenging, right? And for us, certainly it has been challenging. It's challenging for us initially because we really had to rethink our product and the services that we've provided for the last 20 plus years to school districts, how they could now be used in a way that we never envisioned they would need to be used before. Right? Students not in the classroom, oftentimes, possibly teachers not in the classroom, but still our product, which is we've said a few times here, is a front of classroom device. Really, from the onset of the pandemic, that's what we did at Promethean. We set out to rethink and redesign how our product could be used in a different fashion. I think we are very successful in doing that. And through that rethinking about how the product can be used differently, we realized that we had opportunities to bring some of those collaboration tools like we had talked about, Zoom and Teams, onto the interactive display. So now a teacher can be bringing students into the classroom, even if they're not there, by having everybody join that lesson plan that is being run through and displayed on the front of class device, the Promethean active pan. Right. So you can envision a teacher in his or her classroom. Maybe some students were there. Maybe some students were also working from home. The teacher's still presenting the lesson, but children are now able to join that lesson remotely because that lesson is being delivered through one of those collaboration tools. They're
Mhm.
not able to physically interact with the panel because they're not in the room, but they can still see the interaction that's taking place by those who are there. They
Mhm.
can the annotating that's being done, like you had said about a political commentator, what have you. It's just
Yeah.
like watching it on TV almost. They can
Right.
see the teachers highlighting and circling and pointing out. And the same with the other students that are coming up to the front of the classroom to interact. So that was one thing. That was one thing that we brought to our technology. Another thing that we did was we have an application which is called a screen share application. If you could imagine, we all know that through the pandemic, the number of one-to-one devices increased significantly. Really, prior to the pandemic, I think the statistic is there's about 20% of school age children had a one-to-one device. Midway through the pandemic, at least 80% of students had their own one-to-one device, their own computer, their own tablet. We wanted to be able to find a way to interact with those one-to-one devices that had become prevalent in education. And from that, our screen share application was born. And what our screen share application allows a teacher to do is to actually take the information that a student is working on his or her tablet or computer, their laptop, and bring that to the front of classroom and display it on our interactive display. You can imagine, Mike, if you're the teacher and I'm the student, you could be taking the information that I'm working on, maybe a lesson that we're doing as part of some synchronous learning, and you could bring Matt's example up to the front of the classroom so everyone could see what Matt is doing and showcase what is good about it or what needs to be changed.
Mhm.
Nice thing about that application is it doesn't work just only for those students who are in the classroom. It also works with students really wherever they are, if they're outside of the classroom, learning from home as well.
Mhm.
That's another way in which we were able to really make positive steps forward during the pandemic. And it was rewarding to us because just those two applications, if you will, we saw a major uptake in adoption from school districts as they realized that this was something that they really needed and can be used to help continue educating students, regardless of where they were in the classroom or mixed partially in the class and partially at home.
Yeah. Yeah. And despite my desire to retain snow days, I do understand that the split classroom and the ability to fail over to online delivery is increasingly a trend that's out there. A lot of folks have talked about the pandemic frequently as a forcing function and then also as an accelerant, which for a podcast that looks at the future of learning, in some ways, that's a good thing in that everyone was forced to move forward quickly. Now there's maybe a little bit of a backlash, but it is a time for us to think about if we did advance further than we would have been, what does the future look like? I would be curious what you're thinking about, what Promethean's thinking about in terms of maybe the rest of the 2020s. Hopefully things start to settle back into whatever a new normal looks like. And then how does Promethean envision the future of the classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think first off, the future of the classroom now has so much more technology in it than it ever had before. And like you said, it was a forcing function. It was an absolute need to continue educating during the pandemic. Districts were forced to put tools into their students' hands, into their parents' hands, frankly, as well, so that they can continue educating when the kids were not in the physical classroom. And now all of that ed tech, all of that technology that is accessible and with our students today. And it's really at Promethean, what we're thinking about is how do we utilize those technologies to be a true part of an ecosystem that works well with our interactive displays, that works well with the software tools that we have to provide. And then also, how do we provide the requisite training so that it's simple and easy for people to use, intuitive, so that the technology will be maximized for the use cases that it was developed. That's the starting place for where we are right now. And things that we're envisioning really is around how we share content, how content is shared. I had mentioned before about the collaboration tools, right? So there are collaboration tools that we all use today and are commonplace. We are making sure that we have partnerships and that those applications can be worked or can work well with our technology and our software.
Mhm.
We also have other applications, like I had mentioned with our screen sharing application, where you want to be able to take content that is now found in a variety of different areas in digital content. We've moved away from paper based learning quite a bit. And now it's very much digital centric. A digital transformation has accelerated in K-12. And we want to make sure that we're able to take that content wherever it is on whatever ed tech device it may reside on today, in whichever location it may be in the classroom, at home, elsewhere,
Mhm.
and that content up to the front of the classroom so an educator can use it to deliver his or her lesson to the students. Another big piece about that is as we move more content from paper to digital format and digital then up to the front of the classroom and also pushed out to students. We want to make sure at Promethean that we're giving educators the ability to record their lesson plans. So if you think about maybe when you were in school or I was in school, we would go home every day with a piece of paper and it would have our homework on it, what have you. And we would just have to remember what the teacher told us that day in the classroom and how we would complete our homework. Now with our technology, we're thinking of ways that we could actually record a lesson while it's being delivered. So a teacher can then create a digital repository of those lessons that have been delivered so that when a student goes home and they're trying to remember what the teacher had taught them, the student can access that lesson plan directly from, say, a Google Classroom file or drive so that they can get a recollection of what was taught. That's something that we're thinking about and we're moving forward in the future, is really being able to have that content that's being shared digitally at the front of the classroom on our interactive displays be accessible, just not at that point in time, but later on from anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. The other related use case is the learning data that is captured through the interactions with the active panel is then something that both Promethean, but then individual school districts, individual classrooms, teachers can use once you start to understand if you're building interactive content, how much are people actually interacting with it? Which components are getting the most response? As someone who's able to get a bird's eye view on a really broad implementation across the Americas, I'd love to hear a little more about what kind of trends you're noticing, what kind of uses of the technology are popping, are on the rise these days. We always love to hear what's new and emerging. Any trends emerging so far?
Yeah, I think one thing that we're seeing, and this is similar to what we've been used to in our personal life, I would say you want it now. We have the access to everything at our fingertips with our phones, our tablets, our computers. We have access to information immediately. I think we're starting to see that become a trend in education as well. Whereas educators, administrators, they want faster response or they want to learn more quickly how lessons are resonating with their students. Parents want to learn in real time almost. How did my son do in his Spanish test at 11 o'clock this morning? And you're seeing that come to fruition. My wife and I receive instantaneous feedback once my son completes that test. We know how he performed on it. There's a lot of good that comes from that real time information, from that data that you're talking about.
Mhm.
It allows us as parents, it allows administrators, it allows teachers to take action much more quickly to help those who may be falling behind and may need a little bit more help. It really and helps, I would say, to address the learning loss that we've seen coming out of the pandemic, right? Because now with that data, knowing how students are doing and how they're performing and knowing in real time, we're able to act more quickly to help a student not fall too far behind, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Maybe it's providing a student with those recorded resources that I had mentioned before as part of a personalized assignment for him or her to do to work on at night. Or maybe it's providing content that again is personalized for a small group of students or maybe just one student that will help that individual student get back up to speed with where the class is as a whole today. And again, it's that ecosystem that I referred to before. Now you have the technology that allows access to that information and helps to gather the data, right? So that people can make fact based decisions about how students are performing and look at where help is needed and then provide them that help in real time, all utilizing this ed tech that again has really exploded over the past 2 years because of the pandemic.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other new and emerging trend, the new hotness, I like to call it, is referred to as Web3. So we already talked about the pandemic. Now I have to talk about Web3 because the name of the show is trending in education.
Yeah.
Web3 is new. It's got AR and VR on the front end. It's got artificial intelligence and the blockchain on the back end. I always love to get folks, since I talk to a cross section of people who think about the future of learning. In some ways, Promethean is cutting edge around the interactive user experience. So maybe AR and VR is the area that I'd want to ask about first, but also AI in terms of the kinds of applications and the ways you can develop things to make it easier and better for teachers. I'd love to get any sort of future thinking perspective you might have on the new hotness. Any perspective you can?
Some of the things that we think about, I would say at Promethean is how can we help the classroom be more interactive and more engaging? And certainly augmented reality, virtual reality does just that. It allows the children to come into a space that, naturally they wouldn't be able to come into, and it gives them that perspective. And so we do look to partner with and have applications that run AR and VR solutions and have that be part of our tools today. When you talk about artificial intelligence, we think about simplicity, right? How can we observe, right, what a teacher is doing on a regular basis, become smart through those observations, and then almost lead the teacher to the next step before he or she even gets there. And you think about possibly a teacher who is regularly opening up, let's say, her Google Drive to gather information and share that with the classroom. How do we make it more simple for that teacher to access his or her Google Drive, knowing, right, from AI that he or she is going to be going there throughout the day?
Yeah.
That's through a voice command,
Mhm.
right? That could be through a voice command, which allows the Google Drive or the Google Classroom to open up on our interactive display. And then from there, dig even further into the file system to open up, say, a specific lesson delivery plan, right? So that's an example of how one may use AI in the future to gain faster, quicker access to content and really put it at our fingertips, much like we're doing it today in our personal lives.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes me think a little bit about some of the generational shifts that are happening as a parent. You mentioned you're a parent. The younger generations are growing up around this technology. I've heard it described as they have almost a command and control relationship with the tech where they just expect to be able to touch a screen, move things around. Any parent knows the way a kid reacts to an iPhone or a smartphone. It's a whole nother level. Any perspective there is that's got to be aligned in some ways to the strategy at Promethean, where these kids are growing up screen-based interactive, and then they enter a classroom, and frequently it's a old school 20th century classroom. Any perspective? Obviously, the screen-based comes with some challenges, but if it's in a classroom, it's a little more controlled, I would imagine. Any perspective on the rising generations and the way they think about technology and how classrooms are evolving?
Well, I think definitely students are looking for more of that blended learning experience. I think education is looking for more of that blended learning experience, right? Where you have the ability to learn a bit at home, you're using your own device at your own pace, but then you come into the classroom and you're with a smaller cohort, a group, even your whole classroom, if you will, but still be interacting the same way you may have been doing that on your own.
Mhm.
Right. And I think that's an expectation now, especially again with all the ed tech that is found in our students' hands. That expectation is that not just what they see and they do in their personal lives is now also in their education lives. And that's really what we're striving to do at Promethean, is to make sure that we provide those tools that are very similar, like I had said, to the ones that you and I use on a daily basis in our personal lives with our phones and our tablets and our laptops.
Mhm.
Really, it's emulating that in the classroom and having that front classroom device so students can get up and interact with it the same way they may be doing with when you hand your phone to your 3-year-old and he opens up or she opens up the Disney Channel app and watches the movie, right?
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely, yeah, although, we try to be judicious, but I get inherent in 2022, we all make those choices. Yeah, and then the other element of this that is always interesting to me is the future for Promethean. We touched on it a little bit, but as we're getting closer to conclusion, also feel free to bring in other interesting perspectives, other things that you're paying attention to these days, so that we can all try to get out ahead of trends. But where does the future hold? What's the strategic focus if you're looking maybe a few years out? Any thoughts on where Promethean's trying to position itself, or where you see things headed, so that our users can walk away with something to chew on?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say three primary areas. First off, and we just talked about how the experience of the student is so much more advanced today than what it was years ago, right? And that experience, and that my 11-year-old daughter knows how to use Teams just as well as I do, and in my professional life here, right at Promethean, which is the tool that we use, but she uses it probably to a fuller extent than I possibly do. So if you think about where she's going to go next, at college and then on to her professional life, she's actually building that foundation much more quickly now than probably I did when I was come at her age,
Yeah.
not a lot of tools that I'm now utilizing at work on a daily basis.
Mm.
So what does that mean for Promethean? What do we think about? And that is, how do we continue to have our products and our services be front and center, not just in K-12, but then in higher education space?
Mhm.
Also, where a high flex model is becoming very popular, just similar to the hybrid model we had talked about, but
Yeah.
get high flex capabilities, college students, that is the ability, to learn from their dorm room, to learn from home, or to learn in the classroom.
Yeah.
But then also moving on to the enterprise, where we know these tools are being used more and more as corporations and companies are deciding to have more of a virtual work atmosphere. First, I would say what we're doing is looking at those other spaces to see where we can have a positive impact. The next piece is through partnerships and other enhancements to our product, some of which I had mentioned before, thinking about things such as augmented reality, virtual reality. How do we use the data that we're collecting from people who are using the products to be smarter in an AI fashion, right? Those are things that you'll see from us, I think, in the near future, partnerships and other enhancements to our product to make it more simple to use, right? And to bring content into the panel so that it could be projected out. And then lastly, I would say all of this that we've talked about requires an understanding and a learning and a training aspect for our educators and the end user.
Mhm.
And we invested quite a bit here over the past few years, Mike, in our professional services department, individuals who have the knowledge of how these tools are best utilized in the classroom. They can come to our school districts and teach people how to utilize the tools that we have today,
Mhm.
but the tools that we'll be bringing to market in the future as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Very cool. At times in my career, I've been called the Q of James Bond movies, the guy who's tinkering with the new toys, the exploding watches and
Yes.
whatnot. And it does seem like he's at that cutting edge. I appreciate the context around the entire life cycle where frequently when I see in education is that stuff is too siloed and that an opportunity to leverage something that was built in one context is frequently not taken advantage of in another context. I'd love seeing that forward thinking because also as someone who worked in a large organization for years, you always knew where the good conference room was and you knew where the right tools were to make the experience great. And it's also a time where we're thinking more about why should I be in the office? Why don't I just work from home? Well, if you are starting to equip the conference room with more of these types of interactive tools that make the experience even better, it is an argument for getting back into those shared locations where the build out can actually be a little more robust. It's been a fantastic conversation so far, Matt. Before we get to your final thoughts, I'd also love to hear if folks are curious, particularly in K 12, but really throughout. It sounds like you engage with higher ed and the enterprise as well. Where should folks go if they're curious about anything we talked about today?
Yeah, I think the best place to start is at prometheanworld.com, which is our website. They can find a ton of information about what we had just discussed, our products, our services, our capabilities, white papers, use cases, all sorts of information, how to get in contact with us as well. You'll find there, along with some interesting blogs and articles, much like you're putting together here, Mike. You'll find that too at our website, and that'd be the best place to begin.
Awesome. So that's prometheanworld.com. Matt, final thoughts. This is your opportunity to bring it home. If folks are walking away from this conversation, what should they be thinking about?
Well, first off, thank you for the time. We truly appreciate it. I think that, what I would say is that this is an industry, the interactive display industry is something that's most definitely changing. It's been forced to change because of the pandemic, but we're seeing a great deal of benefits from those changes that we know are going to continue on as we return to our normal lives. The world of education, I think, has been changed. There's quite a bit of digital transformation that's been accelerated, as you had said, and we're excited to be part of that digital transformation, allowing educators to be able to bring content from a variety of different places, put it into their students' hand, put it into the front of the classroom so that there can be great lessons plans created, saved, and archived for retrieval in the future. So we're excited about that. And again, we're excited to be a part of the show here today, Mike. Thank you.
Awesome. Matt Cole, SVP of Sales for the Americas for Promethean. I'm ready to go over the recording of this on my telestrator, doing all sorts of interactive, engaging things for my audience, but I don't have my Promethean active panel just yet. Hopefully, our listeners enjoyed the conversation. If you did, write us a review, tell your friends, share the good word. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.